And hello and welcome to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back with more news, tech content and wisdom from the world of marketing. And as always, I am Joe Man on a mission to keep marketing simple, the voice of the Marketing and Finance Podcast and the author of 𝗏𝗲 and Marketing Plans. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards.
Oh, hello, and thank you so much. And of course, my co-host is also a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. He's the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast. Please welcome Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you, our supporters, listeners, and viewers. We are approaching our own little milestone, Roger. Episode 60 is looming, and we'll be talking perhaps next week about what we're going to do about it to celebrate what is coming also to the end of this calendar year. Can I just say that winter has arrived?
It certainly has. It certainly has. We haven't put the heating on yet, though, I have to say. But
have you not?
No, we did light the bioethanol fire the other day, though, because we did feel the need to see some flames dancing in front of our eyes.
So I'm aware that we do have, and I'm extremely flattered as you are, we do have a global audience. So some listeners and viewers will be thinking, no, we're fine. But for the others, we're going to try and bring a bit of warmth in and a bit of light entertainment to kind of help you wrap up your week. Roger has selected an brilliant choice for film marketing. We're going to come on to a movie that probably has been responsible in reinventing the vampire genre in the 90s, amongst others. It is also, I believe, our third vampire movie. We talked about The Lost Boys, we talked about Blade, but this is the one in between, actually, Interview with the Vampire. So well done, Roger. I'm super happy with that.
Fantastic. Can't wait to talk about it. What a gothic masterpiece it is, and an intriguing marketing story behind it.
Absolutely. So before we get to that point, let's start with our usual first segment, In the News.
According to a recent report by Google, UK retailers are further along the digital maturity framework and should find themselves in a stronger position to capture demand this festive season.
Well, that's good news. Netflix is finally rolling out its gaming service. Android users will get access to 5 mobile games initially. 2 of them are based on the Stranger Things TV series.
Microsoft wants to make meetings more interactive, and Teams will get new 3D avatars to push forward towards a metaverse environment in the first half of 2022.
And customers in 12 London boroughs will be able to order products from Currys and have them delivered in 30 minutes by Uber for an additional £5 delivery charge.
A new supermarket war has started between Tesco and Morrisons, not for the lowest prices, but for the fastest electric charging points. Since January 2020, nearly 1,000 new devices have been fitted into supermarket car parks across the UK.
Well, 39% of UK consumers do not trust marketers to safeguard their data, and 87%, Roger, have no recollection of opting in for the communications from brand, according to Akia's 4th annual report.
The team behind the Headliner app has launched a new service called Disco. It can dynamically recommend your podcast content to your blog readers at the right time and the most relevant point of the podcast episode.
Wow. Well, Marks & Spencer's Christmas food TV campaign has begun, but social media is where the brand expects to see the biggest switch, with the mascot 𝗪𝗲 being launched on TikTok.
𝗪𝗲.
What an incredible selection of news. That's
absolutely
hard to choose one, but confession time, Roger, listeners and viewers. I did choose the news about Microsoft and the Metaverse just for you, so that our viewers on YouTube can see your facial expression as you're reading out this item.
Yeah, you've very carefully manoeuvred my soapbox in front of me so I can now step onto it. I mean, the metaverse has all of a sudden become the talk of the town, hasn't it? Everybody's going on about the metaverse. And undoubtedly, Pascal, in a number of years' time, and I don't know whether it'll be 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, the metaverse will be big. It will be as big as the web is now. It's effectively Web Part 3, I think some people are calling it. But at the moment, it seems to me that all the executions of the metaverse at the moment, outside of games, look really crap. Now, technically, a game like Fortnite or Call of Duty could be described as a metaverse because you've created a pretend world, a virtual world. And your character in Fortnite, your warrior, can run around that landscape and interact with buildings and items and this, that, and the other. But what Microsoft are doing, and what Facebook have also alluded to, is creating a meeting environment where you can stick on a pair of Oculus goggles or something like that, and you can be sat in a pretend meeting room with pretty crappy looking cartoon avatars of your colleagues from San Francisco, London, Newcastle, wherever it might be. And they seem to think that this is what people want. Now, admittedly, over the course of the pandemic, when we've had to be locked down, we've all resorted to using Zoom and Teams to have meetings. But at least we can actually see the real people that we're talking to, just like you and I can see each other on the screen now, and I know that it's the real you. Now, do they genuinely think that, apart from maybe having a bit of a laugh for 5 minutes, genuine business people are going to want to sit with big goggles on in a really fake environment looking at cartoon characters instead of the Zoom or Teams actual real life alternative? I just can't see it, Pascal. And that's why it just feels to me as if all this talk about the metaverse it's just like a solution looking for a problem, and they haven't really defined it properly yet, and they're just messing about. And maybe that's the way that we'll get the breakthrough, by messing about. But do business people genuinely want to have meetings in an environment like that?
So, as you can see, viewers and listeners, this was delightful, wasn't it? That was perfect. But no, I think, Roger, you're absolutely right. This is experimentation time. This is us helping Microsoft, Facebook, and all the others finding out how to make this into a much better product. And we do know that the kind of VR, AR solution is doing an amazing job in health, in training, in all sort of things. I mean, I've seen an example of people learning how, for example, to do an operation, how to navigate around an oil rig and avoid danger using those headsets. So there's many, many applications. But one that I would argue with you, I would agree, is the meeting. Now, what Microsoft are arguing is saying people are so tired and fed up of meetings that we've invented this 3D avatar to make the meetings more enjoyable. And I said, no. To begin with, let's have a clear agenda. You know, the usual stuff that I was mentioned to you before. And also, if you want to have a better meeting, improve the audio, improve the video. Don't invite people to transform themselves into avatars. And some of the demonstration were really strange, whereby some people were normal, forgive me, they had their video on, and others had the avatar. So then suddenly you have this kind of weird meeting with somebody who is real and somebody who is essentially a virtual. So how's that supposed to make you feel as the person who switched on the camera? So I think you're right. This is not solving the problem necessarily. And my position will be that Facebook in particular has been going on about this virtual environment since the mid-10s. I mean, I think their conference 2015 and 16, they were doing demonstration of what I think they call Facebook Spaces, if I'm not mistaken, and it hasn't taken up. And Microsoft is saying, with us it'll be better because you will not have to wear the goggles. You'll just be able to switch on Teams, and in the different windows, some will be avatars and some will be just normal individuals. And I'm thinking, what a very strange meetings that is going to be. And beyond, you're right, the laughs for the first 10 minutes, so trying to, do your avatar like you and I did back in the days of having our first Nintendo Wii. Eventually they're going to go, and I think people will just go back to better meetings with better agendas, better video and audio quality, which is where I think the effort should be. Transcription, I think that's where the effort should be. Better content sharing and so on and so forth. But this is not the problem that people are pointing out to those platforms.
I think we just violently agreed with each other there, Pascal.
And just to be clear to our listeners, viewers, if this is your first time, this is not Two Grumpy Men and a marketing podcast. Roger and I have been using tech since the early 80s, would you say?
Yeah.
We have been responsible in creating many of those, participating, should I say, in the creation of many of those solutions. So we're going into this with our eyes wide open, with decades of trade and industry experience. And this metaverse, in the context of a business meeting, is just, I think it's wrong, and it's going to annoy people, particularly non-marketers who are going to hear metaverse mentioned every other sentences. Let's move on to something more positive. I'm going to combine the news of Currys working with Uber, with Tesco and Morrison fighting it out with electric charging points. It's almost this idea of, it's not the product anymore that is part of the offer. It's the added services through partnership with, in the case of Currys, Uber, and in the case of Tesco Morrison, some essentially charging point companies.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a talk on a webinar recently where I was asked the question, it was a financial services webinar, I was asked the question, is it possible to do innovative product development in the financial services industry? And the question was posed like, when will we see the Uber of financial services? And I actually came to the conclusion in that talk that actually, if you look at Uber and you look at these companies like Uber that have changed things, they haven't actually changed the product. Uber haven't invented a new taxi vehicle. They haven't revolutionized the London black cab into a new shape. It's not a hover cab or something like that. And Airbnb didn't change architecture. They didn't change how hotels and apartments are built. They just changed the service that goes around it. And I think that this is where we are seeing the innovation, isn't it? It's the service and the add-ons to products that we're seeing here that is where the real exciting things are happening.
I think for me, the two stories around speed and convenience, which we see over and over again, but not at the expense of real human interaction, which is where I think Microsoft with the metaverse is kind of getting it slightly wrong, but time will tell. I just find it fascinating because in the news segment, you and I have brought to the fore many partnerships that on paper you could argue, what? Sorry, say that again? But from the consumer's point of view, it makes sense. I mean, to find that you're now going to choose Currys, not because the products are better, cheaper, or another, it's because they'll be with you in your office in 30 minutes. Now, I know that you and I have not spent time in an office space for a while, but you remember perhaps the many times you ran out of ink cartridge, or that the photocopier got jammed, or paper ran out because somebody was too lazy to let anybody else know. And then conversely, choosing to go to Morrison's as opposed to another because you know for a fact that your car will be charged faster. I mean, I just find it fascinating in terms of the psychology of consumers.
Oh, this whole thing about charging cars is going to become big, isn't it? As we all move eventually towards electric cars, the infrastructure at the moment isn't really good enough. I was watching on YouTube the other day a video of this guy who was driving from something like Leeds to Manchester, and his electric car had a full charge, and basically the video was with his journey from the two cities, but he was in the bottom corner. He had the percentage of the charge in the vehicle, and it was going down, obviously. And he just hit traffic jams, he hit roadworks, he hit diversions, and in the end, he didn't get to his destination because his car ran out of electric juice and he had to effectively divert to find a charging station. Now, you could argue the same thing would happen with petrol, but at the moment it's easier to find a petrol station, I would argue, than it is to find an electric charging point, and at least people like Tesco and Morrison's are doing something to change that.
I was very tempted to get your reaction on this report from 𝗧𝗵𝗲 about the lack of trust and confidence from UK consumers around data. But I want to finish on a positive. We promised people this would be about warming things up and a bit of light entertainment. So actually, I'm going to ask you about this news from Headliner and this new service called Disco. So I've been creating podcast content for a very long time. I mean, I should know this, but how many episodes have you produced now for Marketing and Finance Podcast?
Yesterday was episode 279.
Oh my goodness, it's just extraordinary. I mean, I'm just in awe of that. And therefore, you some time ago, you probably reached this issue of abundance. How do you make your website visitors find the content? And this idea of your podcast episode being matched to your written content, but not only that, but the very bit in the podcast episode being matched in terms of, I suspect would be keywords and other form of AI and semantic match. I don't know. Are you interested? Are you excited about it?
I think it's very interesting, isn't it, how you can do that and you can point people around. And you're absolutely right. It's something that I probably don't think about enough. I've got, as I just said, 279 different episodes, which means I've got 279 different web pages, one for each episode, plus there's a page with links to all of them. And I've never really sat there and thought, I need to sort out the navigation or maybe categorize them into subjects. They're just all there. So something like this, which will help people to navigate, quite a big podcast catalogue like mine, is got to be welcomed.
Super. Well, listen, let's wrap up this In the News segment. It's been just fascinating. I want to ask you whether it's too soon for Christmas TV adverts. Just want to say that delighted to have seen the report from Google where UK retailers are doing better than others around the globe. So it's nice to hear. It seems that the work that you and I are doing amongst many others out there is finally paying off. But let's slow things down and move on to the content spotlights. In this segment, Roger and I surprise each other with a discovery from the interweb, an article, a podcast, a video. So, Roger, what are you bringing to the table this week?
Well, Pascal, this was originally going to be a creator shout-out, but I promoted it to a content spotlight when I re-watched it for the second time. Now, this is a TEDx talk. It's about just less than 15 minutes long, I think, or maybe slightly more than 15 minutes. So it's really easy to watch and quick to watch. And it's by a friend of mine called 𝗵𝗲. Now, Matt is a marketing consultant like me. He lives down in the south of England, and once upon a time, he was the conference producer of Silicon Beach, which is a really quite famous series of conferences in the 2000s. And Matt's TEDx talk is absolutely and utterly up our street, Pascal. The title of the TEDx talk is the future really all that different? Now, any talk that starts with references to Blade Runner and references to the Back to the Future films gets a massive thumbs up from me as soon as it starts. But Matt really just weaves this whole pop culture thing into this talk about, let's just sit back for a moment and think about why we are always obsessed with the next thing that comes along that's different. Now, I suppose we could reference it back to what we were saying there about the metaverse. Everybody's going mad about the metaverse at the moment. And, a couple of years ago, everybody was going mad about voice search. And arguably, that hasn't turned out to be the massive revolution in communication and marketing than people were predicting. And this talk is all about saying, undoubtedly, just like we said before, the metaverse will end up being something big and being something useful. But let's not become completely obsessed with the next thing. Let's also obsess about the things that aren't going to change. And he segues into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, about the need to keep warm, the need to be fed, the need to be watered, the basic human condition. And, you could argue that keeping your car fueled and electrified or whatever is going to become one of those things that isn't really that different. It's just slightly changed. And I'm not really going to say much more other than that, because I want you to go and listen and watch this. It's, as I say, it's only about 15 minutes long, and see the conclusion that he comes to. It's really positive. It's full of pop cultural references. And he does say, yes, all of these things that are different are coming and they're going to be good. But we do need to focus on the things that aren't changing and see how we can make them better as well. So really thought-provoking from 𝗵𝗲 there. So TED Talk, and the link is in the show notes.
Oh, thank you very much for that. I'm sure we're all going to be, watching that and taking it on board. And I agree with you. It is part of human nature, and I have a lot of sympathy for this idea of moving on quickly. But very often, you and I work with our clients who have not even achieved or finished what they've started. I'd love for someone to spend some time looking also at the adoption rate of, looking back in history, the announcement of item or solution A, and how long it took for this to actually be embedded into our practices or our daily lives. And I'm sure the gestation period is actually a lot longer than people seem to remember. On that very point, I chose an article actually this week, or it found me once again through my app Flipboard, which I use, as you know, for content curation. It comes from Adweek. Adweek, actually, I used to read the printed magazine. Perhaps you did as well in your younger days. And it was just a lovely nostalgic return, albeit online. And this is an article written by Paul Hibbert, who is a reporter for Adweek, specializing in consumer goods. And the title is as follows: The Art of Rebranding for the Digital Era. And then there's a subtitle which I think captures what the article is about, which is about this company called Velveeta, a US-based dairy products company. Velveeta is the latest company to replace shine and dimension with flat simplicity. And this is about an article prompted around this rebranding of Velveeta after 20 years, where they've gone for, that kind of calligraphy only, much flatter, much stronger colours, simplicity. And then the article is a great reminder of all the recent efforts, and there's a couple of reasons as to why I chose it. So they talk about PBS, Volkswagen, Warner Brothers, went for that kind of blue shield. We all know about Visa, MasterCard, Burger King, that you mentioned in a content spotlight a few weeks ago, the 𝗔𝗵𝗲 company that you also mentioned, and a few other brands. We also have our own kind of examples in Europe with Renault, with the financial company that you mentioned as well. So this kind of race for simplicity is kind of interesting. And Paul is quoting a few experts and a few agencies, and there's two main reasons being kind of put forward. One is practical. That flat simplicity makes it easier to put your brand on the internet, particularly. We've all been there. The inconvenience of making your logo fit within the Twitter or the Instagram kind of icon. So that's one argument. The other argument, which is kind of interesting, is around timing and trends, saying that this flat simplicity was adopted, as you and I know, by digitally native startups. I would say maybe 10 years ago we saw that, even longer. And what they were trying to express, those startups, is not just obviously their core offering, but their core values around impact of the environment, around well-being, wellness, and all those things. And it is felt by the larger corporates that those smaller startups have got more credibility with consumers than they have. So now we have this crazy situation where 20 years ago, even less than that, you and I would be in meetings with our lovely customers who said to us, I need a logo that makes me look bigger and I am on par with the established corporates, because otherwise I'm not going to get any clients. And now we have the big corporates saying, we want to have simple logos like the startups, because otherwise our customers are not going to believe in us. And this just kind of reversals is just absolutely incredible. What is interesting about this article is that I read it two days ago, and it stayed with me, which I think is credit to Paul, to his research, and to the quote, because I kept thinking about it. So outside of this article, I'm thinking, well, can you go too far down the road of simplicity? And there is a mention in the article by the attempt by the corporates when they change their logos is to try and stand out in a sea of content. I'm thinking, well, hang on, guys, if you're not careful and you all go for that simplicity, I can assure you already, I can see that it all looks the same. They all go for the same kind of curved calligraphy. They all seem to go for the same colors. So further forward, But where I am kind of happier, if that makes any sense, in terms of the move forward, is if all you do is change your logo to be on trend, I don't think that's going to take you very far. But Paul is quoting someone called Andreas Nichols, who is the creative director at consultancy called Profit, and he's saying, in a way, times has moved on, and the logo is not just something you're going to plonk on a packaging or on your letterhead. The logo serves to be part of the overall experience instead of being the experience. And in the case of Velveeta, not only have they changed their logo, but they've completely transformed their content marketing to the point where they have become a media company. And it all kind of fits well for me from that point of view. So once again, a lovely article to read, wonderful reminder about the history, the evolution of brands who want to be online, but one that really makes you think.
Yeah, and of course, we've mentioned Facebook and the metaverse already today, and Facebook very famously recently have rebranded their holding company as Meta. And funnily enough, a marketing guy that we all know, Mark Schaefer, I saw him quoted as calling this lipstick on a pig. We've got to remember that branding and logos and the fonts that you choose and the colours you use are only part of the brand experience. The brand is almost like the sum of what people think of you, and if people think that you are a bad company, changing the colour of your logo is not going to change the fact that people think you're a bad company. So yes, by all means, simplify and try to stand out. But you've got to look at the whole package, the culture of your organisation, what you stand for, what your service is like, how you communicate with people, the language that you use. That's all part of branding. And this article obviously focuses in on the visual side of things. But I think I am all for simplicity, as we all know. But sometimes I think you've got to think a little bit wider than just the visuals.
Super. So, thank you very much again for your contribution today, Roger. Let us know, all of you, what you make of both the video chosen by Roger and the article from me. If you have yourself some content you'd like us to react and review, please do send them to us. For now, it is time to move on to marketing, tech and apps. So, Roger, what have you found that can make life easier for all of us as content marketers?
Okay, well, Pascal, I've mentioned the company DJI quite a few times recently. I talked about the Pocket 2 camera, which is still absolutely blowing me away with the incredible quality that it creates. And this week, I've seen adverts for their new action camera. It's called the DJI Action 2. Now, the reality is this is an alternative to the GoPro. And of course, GoPros have been around for at least a decade now, probably the most famous style of action camera. And pretty much every vlogger out there uses a GoPro to a certain extent. Now, as the technology of the GoPro has become more and more advanced, and as they've been allowing you to shoot in 4K and now even 5K, what used to be quite small cameras have started, I've noticed, each iteration has started to grow in size a little bit, to the extent where some people are saying, GoPros are almost getting to the size of small DSLR cameras now. Now, what DJI have done here is remarkably innovative, is that they've actually modulated, is that the right word? They've created different modules that you can clip together depending upon whether you need it or not. So, for example, on the GoPro, there's a rear screen so that you can see what you're looking at if you're pointing the camera at something. And in more modern versions of the GoPro, there's also a front screen so that you can see yourself and frame the shot if you're pointing the lens at yourself. But of course, in order to do that, the cameras had to get a bit bigger. Well, what DJI have done is they've created all of these things like that as stick-on modules. So if you don't want the front-facing screen, you don't need it. So you get the basic, effectively, what looks like a lens, and that's all it is. And it literally is about that big in your hand. But if you want the front-facing screen, you've got an extra thing that just clips on underneath. And a lot of this is done by very strong magnets. And they do the same with their power module. They do the same with this magnetic lanyard that you can put around your neck so that the camera effectively gets attached to your chest or part of your body. And there's there's a selfie stick as well with all sorts of different modules on as well. So they've been able to go back to something incredibly small, but they've retained all of the additional stuff that you might want that's available on the GoPro. So I think it's a remarkably interesting way of giving people all of those extras without effectively giving them something that's too big. I'm not actually thinking of going out and buying it just yet, because it's actually quite expensive once you've added all the things up together, although I guess the price point is pretty much similar to the whole GoPro. But again, this company is doing innovative things, and literally, Pascal, about 2 minutes before we started to record this episode, I saw another advert for DJI. They've just launched a new drone, which looks unbelievable, but I'll leave that for another episode.
Yeah, I'm sure DJI have got their remarketing, top notch, so you'll be chased around the interweb, for quite some time.
Absolutely.
But I love product design, as you do, and there's both simplicity, there's convenience, but there's also clearly a lot of thought, a lot of R&D has gone behind it, and it's just something different that is there. As you were mentioning earlier, when people don't do anything very different, they just repeat or kind of rebrand. This is just very exciting. So for me, I was on a bit of a research project, so I'm doing a lot of webinars. Everything is kind of rushing before the end of the calendar year, as we mentioned a moment ago. And I've been trying to find something that would allow me to create some better online resources, some better handouts, digital handouts, some better PDFs and so on. And I wanted something between Microsoft Word and Canva. Microsoft Word doesn't look really nice. Canva sometimes can be convoluted to use to try and do a handout. I must confess, I failed miserably, but in my attempt to find this amazing online resource, I find something else altogether that got me super excited. So the first one is a brand new library of free and premium Google Slides and PowerPoint templates. And they look so different. It would be sometimes can be refreshing to do something either as a little chapter within your webinar or as a standalone presentation that for a fact people can't say, oh, that's PowerPoint as in Microsoft, or that's Canva. It looks very, very different. And they have many business categories for you to filter and use through. So it's called slidesgo.com. And lots to choose from, and they refresh the template library on a very regular basis. So you could argue you could use those for resources, but they tend to be mostly for the presentation slides. The second one is a great little tool to add annotations and comments and video comments on YouTube videos. They call it the play it, pause it, and instantly add a comment. It's called Timeline with LY at the end. And I did a test yesterday by actually linking. So all you have to do is copy and paste the YouTube URL. So I copied and pasted the latest Two Geeks and 𝗏𝗏 podcast. And oddly, we got to in the news where you talk about the metaverse and Facebook changing its name. I paused the video, I clicked record, and then added a video comment saying, well, actually, since this comment was made by Roger, this is what Facebook has done. So I recorded about a 2-minute video within the video. Now, what you can do is send the link to somebody who can watch the video, but when the player, if you like, when it reaches my comment, the video from YouTube pauses and it opens a window with my comment saying, oh, by the way, since this was recorded. And I just thought it was exceptionally good for customer care, for additional content. You can embed this kind of commented upon video. You can share it on social media, on links and so on. So slidesgo.com for additional ideas, suggestions for template, but Timeline for commenting via video and as well as text YouTube videos.
Those are both great resources. I really like the sound of the second one. That's really quite innovative, isn't it? And it really interesting to see how that actually works. So definitely great finds, Pascal. And you're right. I think sometimes, I use Canva all the time and it's great, but sometimes I think you just need that refresh, don't you? So it's good to have something else to have a look at.
Absolutely. And I could see, for example, you commenting on one of your Rods vlogs to give some behind-the-scenes additional features for your VIP customers. Yep, I was quite excited, but I'm still looking for the other solutions. So hopefully by next week, I'll have something for you, viewers and listeners. But as we say all the time at this moment in the podcast, none of this would be possible without the hard work of pioneers and visionaries from the recent and distant past. It is time to move on to This Week in History.
In 1938, people were still talking about Orson Welles' broadcast of his radio adaptation of War of the Worlds, which reportedly caused panic amongst listeners who believed the theatrical presentation was actually really happening. They thought it was a news broadcast.
Oh my goodness. Well, in 1983, Bill Gates announces Windows, a graphic user interface for the Microsoft DOS-based systems. However, customers had to be very patient because Windows 1.0 didn't ship until November 1985, 2 years later.
In 1992, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was released. Sega released the second game for its top franchise, Sonic the Hedgehog, for the Sega Genesis platform. Now, of course, it was called the Mega Drive in the UK.
It was. In 1995, GoldenEye, the 17th James Bond movie, premieres at the Radio City Hall in New York. After a 6-year gap, the world was introduced to Pierce Brosnan as Agent 007 and Judi Dench as M.
One of the best Bond films as well, that.
I remember being so excited. I went to see it twice, actually. Because it was so different. I mean, it really moved on with the time in terms of the action. It was even mentioned in martial arts magazines for the close quarter combat. We know that fight between Pierce Brosnan and Sean Bean, all-out kind of fight. And, of course, Judi Dench, first female M.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I looking back now, GoldenEye was an absolute standout. I don't think the other three Brosnan films were quite as good. And the last two were actually pretty ropey. But yeah, GoldenEye I would definitely put in my top 5, maybe even top 3.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So let me take you back to 1983. I'm sure, like I did, you were using the Microsoft DOS or DOS system, which made you feel like a genius because you had to type in all the commands all the time. But when Windows 1.1 arrived, and to begin with, we could use a mouse to click on different icons, we thought we'd arrived into the future described in Star Trek movies, didn't we?
Yeah, but I'm sitting here thinking, I remember using DOS. And then I remember Windows 3.1, which was obviously further along than Windows 1.0. I don't remember using the original version of Windows. And I'm just thinking back, maybe that was the time when I was using the Commodore 64, or maybe there was even something called a Commodore Amiga at the time. So I think I may have missed out on using Windows 1.
For me, what is interesting about the stories of Windows is one that is very tumultuous. I mean, here, as an example, 2-year delay from the announcement. And I moved on to using a MacBook, I would say, nearly 10 years ago now. And I must say, I'm not regretting any of it. Denise still uses the kind of normal PC with Windows 10. And it always seems so hard to learn. And there's so many different facets and hidden away features. And then by the time you get your head around it, you have to change again.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Windows 10 on my computer here. And, of course, Windows 11 is inbound.
Of course, yeah.
And any day I keep expecting to be flashed up on the screen. Do you want to upgrade to Windows 11? Now, interestingly, you can run this compatibility program. And apparently the chip on my PC isn't compatible with Windows 11, so it might be the fact that this is as far as I can go unless I upgrade my PC. So I was thinking maybe I'll be spared Windows 11 until I upgrade. But somebody did say to me that the compatibility checker is actually a bit flawed, so I might still get given the option. So we'll see. Let's see.
The one thing that I think the last one I used may have been Microsoft XP, or the one... Oh, yeah, do you remember the infamous Microsoft Vista? Oh, that was a horror, wasn't it? And I think people rebelled across public sector, and which is what caused all the problem. People went back to XP. I was very fond of XP. I was also very fond of a product that people didn't know about called Microsoft Story. Have you ever come across this one? Which was a free of charge video editing software. that literally was tucked away. No one knew about it. Microsoft Story, and you could do either slideshows like still photography, or you could put video clips to music and so on. You could do essentially it was like a better version of Movie Maker. So it is part of our lives as computer users, Windows, and it's been an incredible contribution to the world of computers. But I just find that it's fraught with frustrations and problems.
Yeah, I know. It's. I guess it's like anything. They started out simple, didn't they? Windows 1 was dead simple, and you could argue it's the same with the iPhone, the iOS operating system. Originally, it was quite simple, but this constant adding of features eventually gets to the stage where the features, become too complicated, and the learning curve can become too steep, and maybe that's when they are planning Windows 11 or when they're planning iOS 16, they need to sit back and think, have we taken this too far, and should we go back to our roots of simplicity and try to make it easier for people to use?
Now, your mention of the Sega Mega Drive is bringing back so many fond memories.
Yeah, now Sonic the Hedgehog, the original game, I remember my wife and I, and she would have been my fiancée at the time, getting the Sega Mega Drive and playing the original Sonic the Hedgehog. And I think that when we first got that game, we were playing it like nearly 24 hours a day. And in those days, in the original Sonic the Hedgehog, you couldn't save the progress of the game.
Oh, that's right.
If you turned the machine off, then that was it. You'd have to start right at the very beginning. And I'm sure there were several times where we were getting towards the end of the game and it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and eventually we'd even put the game on pause and go to bed and come back the following day, and it's just sat there paused all night, burning the image of Sonic into the screen of the television. But what was so exciting about Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was not only was the graphics an upgrade because it came along a couple of years after the original, but you had this sub-game where it split the screen in two. And you could play against an opponent and race through the levels. So that was just astonishing. It was definitely the first multiplayer game that I'd ever played on the Mega Drive, and just that interaction it just took it to the next level. You could play through the levels, and in the top of the screen was me, and in the bottom of the screen was Trisha, or the other way around, and it scrolled through each of them separately, and it was just at the time it was just incredible to see that. The graphics will probably look quite primitive in comparison to today, but at the time that split screen just blew our minds.
And for me, it was also the evolution of gaming, whereby, I've been playing games since we could, as children, in arcades as well as other things. But now you had a character that you could almost become very fond of, being a big fan. You had the music part of the branding, you had the colours, and everything changed in the 90s around gaming. I used to work in a video rental store. Oh, that was just amazing. So not only did I get to watch the movies, but I got to play the games, because we used to rent out the console and the games, and we did deals like if you rent, GoldenEye was actually on the Sega Mega Drive. If you rent the movie, we'll give you some money off if you want to play the game as well. So that kind of things. But yeah, the Sega Mega Drive, I think from a home entertainment point of view, it's changed everything, because after that, it became just the kind of thing that a family could talk about, but also people would be swapping games in the schoolyards and that kind of things.
Yeah, no, there were some fabulous games on the Mega Drive, and we'll have to stop talking about it, otherwise I'll start talking about 𝗓𝗓𝗄 Dragon and Hellfire and what was that one with the dolphin called? Echo the Dolphin.
The Dolphin.
Get me off this subject, Pascal. Otherwise we'll be here all day.
Well, let's do that then by going back into the present with our creators shout out. Now, in this segment, Roger and I give somebody a big shout out because of the amazing work they do to add value to their community. So, Roger, who is under the spotlight this week?
Okay, so I'm very grateful for an old friend of mine, Owen Phillipson, for pointing me to this podcast. He actually tagged me in a post on LinkedIn. Now, Owen, I know from the Content Marketing Academy days a few years ago, and Owen knows how I love simplicity, and Owen also knows how I fight up against jargon and gobbledygook that people use in their marketing. And this podcast has got a fabulous name. It's called Science Diction. Don't you think that's great? Science Diction. And it's all about using language and that sort of thing. But he's pointed me at a specific episode, which is jargon and why we love to hate it. The podcast is presented by Joanna Mayer, and this particular episode is just right up my street. It's just focusing in on all the ridiculous jargon that we use. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in, whether you're in tech, whether you're in cupcakes, whether you're in car manufacturing, or whether you're in marketing consultancy, there is language that we use that can bamboozle our customers. And I just love the way that they've focused in on this. But the edge to it is this really, maybe we say that we hate jargon, but maybe secretly, we actually do love it. So well worth checking out. I've only listened to the one episode so far, so thanks Owen for that, but I am going to listen to some more of them, because with a title like Science Diction, you've just got to, haven't you?
This is amazing. The other thing that is amazing, Roger, is very much like you, I'll be thanking somebody for introducing me to this creator shout-out. So Michelle McCarthy-Morgan, a big supporter of Two Geeks and Marketing podcast, was interviewed recently on the UK Health Radio show. And she shared that an announcement on LinkedIn. So thank you, Michelle, for introducing me to the Real Feel Good Radio. ukhealthradio.com is the first ever radio station in the world dedicated to health and wellness. It has been founded by Johan Ilgefritz, and I recommend anyone to go on the About section to read the story and watch the video of what inspired Johan to launch this radio, which is linked to his own personal combat against cancer. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because I am so blown away by the effort this would have taken 7 years ago to create a 24/7, Roger, a 24/7, 365 days a week, a year, radio show. So this is a web radio. This is not just a podcast that is published once a week. They have shows on the hour, 24 hours a day. It's absolutely incredible. And he has successfully gathered around him around 28 presenters, each with their own specialism. When I checked UK Health Radio, I literally landed on a yoga class, which was absolutely brilliant. And I found myself very much like you, just drawn in, and I listened to for the rest of the evening. So examples would be things like there's a tech health show, there's Yes to Life, there's To Immunity and Beyond, there's Health and Humour, there's The Recovery Road, The Menopause Sisters, and so on and so forth. It's so incredibly rich. And more to the point, Roger, it's also, I would say, would have been quite a challenge technically in terms of the tech that Johan had to use. I'd be delighted to understand more about it, but just to kind of wrap up on their own statement. So this is a radio show to deliver reliable health information so that you, our listeners and readers, because they have a magazine, are able to make better quality decisions when it comes to your health and that of your family. And all the presenters, all the guests and so on are so dedicated. So first I was delighted that Michelle was a guest on their show, but also I'm delighted to have found a web radio that I will definitely be listening to.
It's incredible how powerful radio is. And I think that sometimes as marketers we forget how popular radio is. In fact, I think that radio is probably having a bit of a renaissance through apps and things like that. And again, in marketing circles, the gurus are always telling us, the majority of content that's consumed is video. And, you and I have talked on this podcast many times, audio is still a very, very powerful medium. One of the reasons why Clubhouse has become so popular and Twitter Spaces. But good old-fashioned radio absolutely isn't dead. No, don't listen to anybody that says it is. And again, from a marketing point of view, if it's a radio station that takes advertising and you can target your local area and that's the sort of marketing communications that you might be into, then it still works.
Absolutely. So firstly, Joanna Meyer and Johan Ilgefritz, thank you for the inspiration, but also to Owen and Michelle, thank you for pointing us in the right direction. Really appreciated. All right, Monsieur Roger Edwards, we have reached the time for film marketing.
Yes.
Now, Roger, 1994 was a very good year for movie fans. We went to see Stargate, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Wyatt Earp, Legends of the Fall, Shawshank Redemption, Speed featured in this show, Forrest Gump, The Crow, Time Cop, so many others, including Interview with the Vampire. Let's watch the trailer again.
What do you say we get started? So you want me to tell you the story of my life? I'll tell you my story. I'll tell you all of it. Gee, how? I'm flesh and blood, but not human. I haven't been human for 200 years.
From the novel by Anne Rice. From Neil Jordan, the director of The Crying Game.
I've come to answer your prayers. Life has no meaning anymore, does it?
His name is Lestat.
But what if I could give it back to you? Pluck out the pain and give you another life. One you could never imagine. I can see you lying on a bed of satin.
He chose one man. He gave him infinite power. Eternal life. And a daughter who would be forever young.
This is the only real evil left.
And then he took the light of day.
You're a vampire who never knew what life was until it ran out in a red gush over your lips. I can't stand this any longer.
You made us what we are, didn't you?
God kills indiscriminately, and so shall we. You like dying? You condemn me to hell! Monster. Unhappy family. Hatred we end her suffering and yours. But do not doubt, you are a killer!
I want some more.
Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Stephen Ray, Antonio Banderas, Kirsten Dunst, and Christian Slater. Interview with the Vampire.
Wow, Roger, thank you so much for suggesting this film for film marketing.
Oh, do you know what, Pascal? I was looking through Amazon Prime the other day for a film to watch and hadn't intended to. I wasn't even looking for a horror film at the time, and for some reason it just popped up as a suggestion. And I thought, oh, look, Interview with a Vampire. Remember that being a good film. So we watched it, and wow, memory lane. It is such a good film. Gothic horror at its best. I just love the sort of historical setting, New Orleans and Paris as the main feature. Really quite bloodthirsty film. There's a lot of blood and a lot of gore and a lot of really quite nasty violence in this. And I guess it was probably a resetting of vampire lore, wasn't it? Really, until Interview with a Vampire, it had always been Count Dracula, whether it was the Christopher Lee version of the 60s or it was the sort of the more up to date. Can't remember the name of the person who did the vampire reboot of the 90s, but this changed everything when it came to vampires, and I guess it redefined vampires until the Twilight series came along a decade or so later, and True Blood, the TV series, redefined vampires. But for a while, this was it.
I think for me what is interesting is, so we had The Lost Boys 1987, and then nothing else I would argue. Maybe Near Dark is in there as well. and then there's a big gap. So with The Lost Boys, being a vampire, the message was, it's cool. I think you and I agree that we wanted to be vampires but when watching The Lost Boys. But then when you watch an interview with a vampire, you go, no, I don't want to, because being a vampire is so tragic. And that's why it really was lovely. So thanks to you, I found the movie on Amazon Prime and watched it again last night. And because I used to own the video on VHS cassette, which tells you how long ago that was, I remember it very, very well. But watching it all those years later, with me at a different age, I got the sense of this is a horrible movie to watch, because Lestat is a horrible, horrible person. He's selfish, he's manipulative, he's vindictive, he is very violent, he's very sadistic. Humans to him are just food and cattle. And obviously you've got the opposite with the character of Louis. And I thought that this was one of the most emotionally charged vampire movies I've seen, because then years later we have Blade in 98, which again has been reviewed in Two Geeks Marketing Podcast, which takes the vampire genre in a different stratosphere altogether. And like you, I loved the fact that it was taking place in the 18th and 19th century, because then you could have, which they did do, amazing art direction. You could have costumes and so on and so forth. But I was very surprised the special effects have not aged one bit.
No, they were remarkable. And the makeup effects of Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, the sort of the pale skin where you can see the veins through the skin, remarkably good makeup. And the gore factor. I mean, there's one bit where Louis chops another vampire in half with a scythe or something, and splat down to the ground. That's really quite, it felt a little bit Walking Dead, 20 years before Walking Dead type of special effects there. Incredible. But yeah, there's a massive amount of melancholy, and you can see that, Brad Pitt realizes how miserable being a vampire is and doesn't want to become the evil person that Lestat is. There's a massive, massive emotional tug there.
Well, it's interesting. My memory of watching it when I was much younger, 94, is literally a different century. I really enjoy the dark humour. At this moment when Lestat is reprimanding, obviously, Claudia, because she killed the, I think, either the piano teacher and stuff like that. And then you laugh. But then watching it now, I'm thinking, this is terrible. This is, and I don't know, I think it's a movie that therefore can be enjoyed for more different reasons. But as you hinted during the introduction of this episode, it had a very tumultuous, to use that term again, marketing campaign, didn't it?
Well, when we were doing the research for this, Pascal, I actually initially couldn't find anything about the actual marketing campaign by the studio, other than, as you would expect, the posters and the trailer. I do actually like the strapline for the film, "Drink from me and live forever," which I thought was good. And again, that hides that undercurrent of the fact that living forever as a vampire in this context isn't actually a very pleasant prospect. But I think the marketing for this film actually ended up revolving around a great big spat, a bleak argument between the writer of the original novel upon which the film was based, Anne Rice, and the studio. Because basically, she wrote the screenplay for the film as well as writing the original source novel, but she objected massively to the casting of Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt in this film. But particularly, she was almost insane with anger about Tom Cruise being cast in this role, thought that it was the worst casting choice, thought that they would pander to his youth, thought that they would dumb it down because he had this clean-cut sort of American boy image. And she really just went up against the studio and created this furore in the run-up to the launch of the film. And of course, what it inadvertently did was it focused people's attention on the film. And arguably, if she hadn't had such a problem with the casting, the film might not have been as successful because of it. She drew so much attention to her dislike of the people that they'd cast in the film.
People are suggesting this was a tactic by the studios, and I can assure you, judging by the tone and the content of what she complained about, it couldn't have been, because it was just too vitriolic.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, I became aware of that tension. I also became aware that Geffen Pictures, the producers, actually took her on and said, "You're wrong." Yeah. And for me, it was also, is it possible that there's been just a breakdown in communication? Maybe she doesn't understand how films are being made. And with respect, actors will act. You know, they're given a character, they can do a good job. I'm also thinking, well, did she not know about Stephen Frears? Did she not know about the likes of Neil Jordan? Did she not look at Antonio Banderas, Christian Slater? You know, did she not know about their work? I mean, Neil Jordan had discovered, like many others, with a Company of Wolves in the early 80s. He did Mona Lisa, which is just outstanding. A Crying Game 2 years prior. So I'm wondering whether she just didn't understand the world of cinema necessarily. It's understandable that she should be very protective of her work. I mean, the Vampire Chronicles, this was written in 1976, if memory serves. And that would just, and I was also thinking, Roger, if you are the people making the film, that can't be nice. I mean, I know you could say, oh, you know, I'm sure Tom Cruise can just, you know, ride it because he's going to be paid a fortune. But when you're there, you know, he did confess when you're suspended on your feet for an entire morning with those very old-fashioned kind of eye lenses, you've got makeup and so on, and behind, you know, there's a murmur of Anne Rice and happy with you. It can't be a very, very nice thing. But there is a good conclusion to all this, isn't there?
Yeah, and just before I tell you what the conclusion is, I will agree with you. You know, she was saying that the casting was like putting Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer in the roles of the vampires. And, you know, we're looking back, 30 odd years here, and we obviously think of Tom Cruise as he is today, you know, an actor that's been around for ages, a middle-aged man. But back then, he was relatively early in his film career, wasn't it? I'm trying to think when Risky Business came out. That must have been about 86, 87. So he's only within the first decade. So I imagine he probably did get right inside his, you know, inside his ego and inside his heart, some of the horrible things that this woman was saying. But, as you say, the conclusion was that when she saw the film, she absolutely loved it. And moreover, she absolutely loved Tom Cruise's performance and Brad Pitt's performance, and she was so sort of racked with guilt, I guess, that she even took out adverts in newspapers herself to effectively apologise publicly for the row she'd caused, which again gave the film another boost. And in fact, you can find on YouTube a clip from around the time, and it's pretty ropey quality, to be perfectly honest. It must have been shot on a very low resolution camera. But again, she's saying, I was wrong, and this film is great, and the performances are great, you know. And you've already said that Lestat's character is a nasty, horrible, evil person, but my goodness, Tom Cruise acted his socks off to create that evil character. And I'm glad that in the end she saw that what they have actually put together was pretty impressive.
And that's very much to her credit, and yeah, that to me is what's important. So then certainly is breathing better. By the way, her supporters, the readers of the book, were prepared to just literally not go to the movies in support of her cause. So then they were turned around. And as you mentioned, we had some very, very striking poster art. I mean, I used to love just looking at the front cover of that VHS cassette with the menacing look of Lestat and looking into, you know, Louis and Claudia. For me, it's back to, this is 1994. it's hard to remember what life was like in 1994, but what I can tell you, Roger, and to our viewers and listeners, the internet, which is where I sometimes focus on, was very different. So what you had was Yahoo. Oh yes, Yahoo was the number one destination for film news, snippets, and reviews from critics, and IMDb was merely 3 to 4 years old, so it was more like a very posh Excel spreadsheet.
Yes.
So what we had in terms of the internet was blogs, both personal moviegoers, but also celebrities like Roger Ebert, and you had, of course, the extensive coverage in print media. And what was very telling about this movie, back to your point earlier about the the costumes, the era, the fact that with their long hair they look like rock stars, frankly, all of them.
Yeah.
Not only did movie magazines cover it, but also I would call them lifestyle magazines like New York Times, the Rolling Stone, Esquire, Vanity Fair had an interview with Tom Cruise. Of course, Fangoria, that we mentioned a few times, they would cover it. And then what they did was, they had obviously the print version. In 1994, all they did was to put the words onto a web page. So in 1994, film fans would have to read a text-only web page, which is unthinkable, of course, nowadays, because we didn't have the connectivity to even look at a picture or a video. In the UK, I remember I used to get Flicks magazines. They were in OK magazine, which I did not read, in case people are wondering. But certainly I used to buy Empire magazine and Total Film all the time, and they were covered in there. But the one unintended also form of PR was during the LA screenings, Los Angeles screening. 1994, the audience were not used to such direct violence. I mean, if you've not seen the film, apologies, it's going to be a spoiler, but when Claudia tries to kill Lestat, it's what a scene. I mean, it's so violent, and back to the special effects and so on. And there is I thought it was a very funny scene, but somebody else disagreed with me. Do you remember the one where Louis refuses to drink blood from humans, so Lestat shows him how to drink from a rat, and he catches a rat and literally bites into the necks and empty the blood of the rat into a glass. Well, Oprah Winfrey disagreed with that scene, and he walked out of the Los Angeles screening, creating more PR coverage, making people thinking, I've got to see this film. It's so bad that Oprah Winfrey walked out.
Indeed. And, again, that's influencer marketing. 30 years ago, isn't it? It's influencer marketing 30 years ago. I'm surprised that they never made a sequel to this. Now, Anne Rice has written many books in the Vampire Chronicles series, and the next book was called The Vampire Lestat. Now, it was going to be a bit more of a history of Lestat rather than Louis. But they never got Tom Cruise back to play Lestat again, which is a real shame. I think there was a sequel in the end of the third book, Queen of the Damned, maybe Correct. It was called. And I've never seen it, and I believe it's utter rubbish, so I probably will not watch it. But maybe it's better that this film stands alone on its legacy.
I would agree. In terms of follow-up, only a few months ago, AMC announced that they're getting pretty close to doing a TV series. An adaptation of the Interview with the Vampire, but it would be a TV series. So I'm back to your point. Well, I've seen the film. Again, I love the film. Would I want to see a TV series based on the same story? Possibly. Once again, if they're going to produce it as well as they have done the main feature, that'd be very exciting. But I do think that this is the first time that in film marketing we've had to talk about this conflict and clash between the writer and the producers, to the degree that, I mean, literally, that's all the media and others were talking about.
Yeah, I think so. And in looking back now, in hindsight, it was really interesting, and it probably led to a great deal of the success that the film had. But at the time, I can imagine it must have been quite stressful and frustrating for everybody involved.
Yeah. And I'd like to think that all parties have learned from that, and it may well be that particularly for the filmmakers, they've learned to maybe communicate with the writers better, because I don't think this has been the same experience for J.K. Rowling with the Harry Potter franchise.
No.
Wow. Well, sadly, Roger Edwards, this is the end of this episode of Two Geeks and Marketing podcast. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful co-host and bringing to the table many of the content and tech that can make life easier for all of us. To our viewers and listeners, thank you for your support. It is much appreciated. Please leave comments and suggestions in the usual places. Until the next time, please go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni and he was Roger Edwards.